Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 27 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Seattle Kraken and won by a score of 4-2. It was just yesterday that they managed to defeat the Kraken 8-5 back in San Jose, and today they take it to them 4-2, claiming 4 of a possible 4 points over this back-to-back home-and-home weekend series against their fellow Pacific Division team. With that, the Sharks now find themselves with 23 points in the standings, good for 26th place in the league, which might not seem like that much of an achievement, but considering last year the Sharks were last place in the league for the majority of the season, it is some notable improvements. Having said that, it does need to be mentioned the fact that the Sharks have played a lot of games thus far this year. I believe they're tied for the most with the New Jersey Devils, but the major difference being that the Devils started this season much earlier on than the Sharks, having played a back-to-back series overseas in Europe with the Buffalo Sabres. The Sharks started on time with the rest of the league, and yet they've managed to accumulate 27 games played already. To put it into perspective, they are 2 points ahead of the Anaheim Ducks in the standings, and the Ducks have played 5 less games. The fact that a month and a half into the season that is actually happening is absurd and shows just how tight the schedule has been for the Sharks. The good news, of course, is that as we move later on into the season, the Sharks will have a lighter schedule than every other team, but it does mean that the Sharks, they haven't really had a lot of time to breathe thus far. But they have been doing a very good job of digging themselves out of the hole that they started this season in when they lost 9 in a row, and especially as of late, putting up 22 goals over the last 4 games, winning 3 of the possible 4 of them, including the one loss being to the Ottawa Senators, in which they played their best game of the season. They probably should have been able to win that one, which would have had them on a 4-game winning streak. It would have been a very, very impressive feat, but still, nice look for the Sharks as of late, as they have really been bringing it back. When it comes to the first period of this game, kind of similar to the first period of last game against Seattle as well, the major difference being that the Sharks and the Kraken ended up getting better goaltending. Decord was a lot better than what Grubauer was, and while Vanacek wasn't bad for the Sharks last game, Blackwood was clearly on another level here. And so in the first period, instead of it being just a trade of offense blow for blow, it is only Mario Ferraro's goal that would stand, and it is 1-0 Sharks after 20 minutes. Though in the second, the Sharks would start to turn it on and get some real offense generated from maybe some unlikely suspects. It is Cunnin and then Ceci and then Will Smith who continues his point streak, and suddenly it is a 4-0 victory for the Sharks. But that's when things did shift. The Kraken, as the Sharks have usually done, managed to respond very quickly after that 4th goal with a goal from Jaden Schwartz, and suddenly the Seattle Kraken took control of this game. It's not as though the Sharks were fully dominant in the first half, but they were a lot more competitive with Seattle compared to the last half of this game, where it was mostly Seattle controlled. But Blackwood helps keep the Sharks' 3-goal lead alive heading into the 3rd period. In that third, we saw the Sharks just yesterday manage to close the last 20 minutes of that game out very, very effectively, even with just a 1-goal lead. Here tonight with a 3-goal lead, it got a little bit dicey at times. Jared McCann scores just a few minutes into the third to bring it to within 2, but then the Sharks do a good job, especially in the 6-on-5, to kill things off, and then it is until the last 8 seconds when Seattle would appear to score a goal to bring it to within 1. At that point, it was likely still too little too late. With only 8 seconds left on the clock and with a center ice face-off, it was unlikely Seattle would be able to actually get another one on the board. It would take a bit of a minor miracle, but it would have given them a chance. But instead, the NHL initiated a goaltender interference challenge since this goal happened in the last minute of the game, and they actually ended up calling this off, which was a little bit of a surprise, as it didn't feel as though there was much contact between Yanni Gourde and Mackenzie Blackwood. There was like a slight bit, and it did cause Blackwood to flinch, but still, I would think that this was one that was going to stand, especially since it was a goal that looked very similar to one that the Sharks scored just a few games ago against the Los Angeles Kings, when it was Mario Ferraro moving through the crease, making slight contact with Rittich and preventing him from coming out to challenge on this goal, and yet that one still stood, even though the Kings did challenge it for goaltender interference. So it does seem as though the NHL sometimes just kind of spins a wheel and sees whether or not it lands on yes or no for some of these calls. The actual rulings are a lot more ethereal than actually being able to pin down what they exactly are, and so most of the time when it comes to these goaltender interference challenges, you're kind of just crossing your fingers and hoping it goes in the direction of your team. Anyhow, moving on to the players to talk about, we have the Sharks top line of Eklund, Celebrini, and Zetterlund once more. The lineup does not change compared to last game, and not that much of a surprise considering the Sharks did put up 8 just yesterday. And this line, they had some chances for sure. We'll start off with Fabian Zetterlund. I've kind of been going back and forth on Zetterlund recently. Against Ottawa, he was good, but was struggling to really keep up with the greatness of both Eklund and Celebrini. Then last game, just yesterday against Seattle, I thought he was a good bit better and was maybe even the standout performer of that top line. Here tonight, however, Zetterlund did regress a decent amount, and he just wasn't a very good offensive option for both Celebrini and Eklund. It felt as though he was just not finding himself in the correct positions to help out offensively. And this might seem like a little bit of a mean comparison, but it was a bit of a Barclay-Goodrow-esque type of game, where in the sense that I don't think Zetterlund was terrible as a whole. I thought he played an okay game. He just didn't give a lot of help to his two much more skilled line mates who were certainly trying to actually set up some chances there. So Zetterlund, you're going to look for a little bit of improvement if he does manage to maintain this top line spot, which, considering the Sharks have been winning a lot as of late, he probably will going into next game. When it comes to the two other players, we'll start off with Macklin Celebrini. Like I said, very, very active in the first period. He had some great chances, some solid chemistry with Willie Macklin. As this game wore on, the space to actually make plays did close out a little bit. He didn't really get as many great looks in the second or the third. He did hit a post early in the third. That could have been another goal for him to continue his goal streak, but alas, not the case. He would at the very least pick up an assist on the Cody Ceci goal, so his point streak does continue, and he continues to try and make a comeback here in the Calder race, having missed already 12 games this season due to injury. But generally, Celebrini, the good news about him as a player is that even if he's not scoring a ton, though the point is still there, he is very helpful in other ways. His defensive game is much more developed than most other 18-year-olds have really ever been in the NHL. He has come exactly as advertised as that 200-foot player. He can win faceoffs at times. He can be a useful defensive player. He had some minutes there in the 6-on-5 situation for the Sharks where I think he did a pretty admirable job. Did get that fail clear right at the end that did lead to Matty Beniers' goal, but I don't blame him too much on that. And so I still thought generally Celebrini was probably one of the Sharks' best players, likely in that top 3 or maybe top 5 at the worst. And when it comes to Willie Macklin, very much similar things can be said between him and Celebrini. I again was a fan of what Eklund can do. He continues to have success working along the boards and being a very viable option in that particular area. Usually on paper, you have a line as young and maybe inexperienced as like Celebrini, Eklund, and Zetterlund. You might be thinking like, oh, well, who's going to be the real power forward, the guy who really hounds after pucks? Eklund fills that role exceptionally well, which is why he does have great chemistry, because if you have a player who can feed the puck to Macklin Celebrini, you're usually going to be able to have success. But as I mentioned earlier on, it felt as though Zetterlund was a bit of a weak link on this line, and so they didn't really get to generate a ton. But we did see, especially in the first period, Eklund had a very, very close call on a almost essentially empty net because Decord was out of position a good bit on this shot, so he could have had a goal there. And generally, I thought Eklund played a solid game, especially from a defensive standpoint as well. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, this is an interesting one because it is a line that is kind of treated by Ryan Warsofsky as like a checking line in a way, where when the Sharks are looking for like a good defensive shift, these are the 3 players that they do send on. The major problem here is that while Wenberg has been one of the Sharks' better defensive players thus far this season, his 2 wingers are a bit less so. Cunnin does manage to find success in like penalty kill situations, and I was also very appreciative of him on his effort in the 6-on-5 at the end of this game. When it comes to 5-on-5 defending though, Cunnin does struggle against like when it's up against other teams' top players, first and second lines. Cunnin can struggle to really close out those gaps in the offensive zone. And then the other winger here, Tyler Toffoli, just isn't all that good of a defensive player. Sure, he's like a bit better than a Will Smith, but he's likely in the lower half of defensive caliber players. And so there were multiple shifts here tonight in which the Sharks would send over this line trying to be that defensive core to really help out, and yet they would get hemmed into their own zone and they would allow these great chances on net. So I don't really know if that's like the long-term solution for the Sharks, but at the same time, considering the Sharks are maintaining these lineups, I imagine moving forward, again, because they're getting all of these victories, it likely will remain the same, and so we're kind of just hoping that they can improve from that aspect. When it comes to individually, Luke Cunnin does manage to score, which is nice right out of the penalty box. box. But besides that, usually in previous games he had been good for picking up a couple of chances and bringing some speed to the game. It felt as though he was lacking a little bit in that area. The same would go for his opposite winger. It's not so much the case in which Cunnin was clearly the weak link of this line, which might be what it looks like on paper, because I don't think Toffoli was actually all that great here tonight. He had a very weak defensive effort. I can't remember if this was in like the second or the first period, but there was a portion where Toffoli was one of the last man backs for the San Jose Sharks, and yet for whatever reason, after making actually making an effort to get back defensively, he then kind of just floated off to the right side of the ice, leaving two Kraken players all alone in front to get a great chance onto Blackwood. That was a real head scratcher move, but it's something that we have seen at times from Tyler Toffoli this season. It feels as though every time he steps on the ice, you're either going to get like a really dedicated effort from Toffoli where he's really aggressively chasing after players in the defensive zone and trying to make an impact, and then 50% of the time you just kind of get like a lackadaisical, slowly skating around, somewhat lazier shift from Tyler Toffoli. So I wasn't a huge fan of his game here tonight. And then when it comes to Wenberg, well, I do think he was a great boost as per usual for the Sharks defensively. There wasn't a ton doing offensively, which makes this more of like a middle of the range type of game for Wenberg. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we of course have Granlund, Smith, and Kostin. With Granlund, the Sharks' leading scorer on this third line, you are expecting big things, and of course Will Smith has been a lot better as of late, but the real unsung hero, I will say, of the Sharks' third line is Klim Kostin, who I think has fit in marvelously. He's not just dead weight, he's not just along for the ride, he's not just a spectator to the strong passing plays between Granlund and Smith. He is a big part of why this line has had success over these last couple of games. He actually is like a pretty skilled player when he's able to use it and he's not trying to do too much. He has a big-bodied guy who can separate players from the puck. He's not going to be able to be separated himself from the puck all that easily. He's got good stick handling moves. He has the ability to make a pass. He's got an okay enough shot as well. And so generally he has been a fantastic player in this role. And one of the problems that we were talking about earlier on this season is that the Sharks did seem to be lacking just that one extra, at least, maybe more than one, but at least one extra top 9 forward who was actually a scoring option. This is why you ended up in a situation with a Barclay Goodrow on a line with Celebrini and Smith, because unless the Sharks wanted to make a call-up, which honestly I think they should have, and yet they haven't done so, there weren't that many other great choices for that particular position. Now that Kostin is proving himself as a trustworthy player and someone who can play in this role, suddenly the Sharks are looking a good bit deeper. And so I very much appreciated his role on this third line. But of course, there were other stars here of this line. Mikael Granlund, who returned from injury in last game, and I thought he played okay in that first one against Seattle. Not amazing, but still looked rather solid and did score. He was even better here tonight. Fantastic game for Granlund. You could make the argument he was the Sharks' best players. He was just extremely involved offensively for sure. He had that great pass to Will Smith on the 2-on-1 that led to that goal. He had a fantastic move just to get this puck into the zone, but then also to make the pass on the Mario Ferraro goal in the first period. Granlund was all over and really helps drive this third line that, with his presence there, creates mismatches and makes it very awkward for other teams to really kind of defend in those situations. And then when it comes to Will Smith, a very positive game yet again for Smith. He continues to just really understand the game at the NHL level more and more as each day passes. He's being able to find the open and soft areas on the ice where he can find some success, where he can actually get those goals, get those assists. There obviously is still work to be done. For instance, one of the major issues I felt tonight is that there were actually twice in which he would initiate a puck battle for himself along the boards to try and kind of stall for his team. But if you're going to make a play like that, you kind of have to make sure you're going to win that puck battle. And then both times in the situation, he probably could have just gotten this puck in deep, but he tries to get this puck battle so he can maintain possession for the Sharks while they do change, and both times it burned the Sharks. Not so much in terms of actually getting goals for Seattle, but in terms of getting chances and zone time for the Kraken. So Will Smith definitely does need to improve in that area, needs to be more aggressive and better in just the puck battles there. You take a look at the other teenager for the Sharks on the team, Macklin Celebrini. Not only is he really good puck battler, he's actually one of the best players in the entire league when it comes to winning puck battles along the board. So Smith, that's someone to learn from in terms of a young guy in a similar position. When it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, I wasn't super impressed with what they were able to do. They had one or two okay shifts here at even strength tonight, but more often than not, it felt as though they were slightly abused in the defensive zone. I wasn't particularly impressed with what Cardwell was able to do. Not a bad game, but not a great game either. Nico Sturm, slightly invisible, and then Ty Dellandrea, while I do appreciate the play he made on the Luke Cunnin goal, it was actually rather impressive, the drop pass and then kind of pushing the pace and pushing the defenseman for the Kraken back in his own zone so Cunnin would have more room to take this shot. I appreciate the effort there, but besides that, not a lot of great things from this fourth line, which was just kind of an average to slightly below average game for them. When it comes to the Sharks defensively, we have their top pairing of Walman and Ceci. And Walman, you know, as I've mentioned time and time again, he's on a bit of a knife's edge. Some games are incredible, some games are pretty bad. Here tonight, it was an incredible performance for Jake Walman. There weren't major mistakes, he wasn't finding himself out of position, and he was still providing a ton of offense for this team. Even when he's not playing all that well, he is still the Sharks' best defenseman by a significant margin, but when Walman is on, it's like a night and day difference between having him on the ice and not having him on the ice. He's definitely been one of the Sharks' more MVP type of players throughout this entire season thus far. He picks up a couple of assists, including a very impressive secondary assist on the Cody Ceci goal. This is a bit of a handcuff pass from Macklin Celebrini because Walman is kind of teeing up for a slap shot here, but he recovers exceptionally well, absorbs the pressure from the Kraken defenseman, and then is able to still make the pass to Celebrini, who now has a lot more room to make his play. Great play for sure from Jake Walman. He's just been generally a lot better over these last couple of games. He had not the best games in the two previous, but he's been a lot better over these last couple and extremely solid here tonight. When it comes to his defensive partner Cody Ceci, I was also impressed in a way with what Ceci was able to do. There were still a couple of very questionable moments that he had here and that he constantly has throughout this entire season, moments that just make you question what Cody Ceci is even thinking and what is going through his mind. But more often than not, he has been rather good. There is obviously a situation here in which, because Ceci is playing with Jake Walman, he does manage to look a lot better than if he was playing with like Mario Ferraro, because Walman is such a positive force for the Sharks. So that does help make Ceci look better on paper. But I do still think he's a bit of an underrated player amongst Sharks fans thus far this season. He hasn't been nearly as bad as I think many people are saying. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive pairing, we have Ferraro and Liljegren. I thought they were all right here tonight. Liljegren, I would say, struggled a bit with some of the speed that the Kraken were actually approaching this game with. Actually, if we take a look at the Sharks' first period, there were many moments in which the Kraken were getting behind the Sharks' defense in the neutral zone. The Sharks were forced to adapt to that as the game wore on, but even still in the defensive zone, I think Liljegren struggled a little bit. Not so much in which that he was like a clear defensive liability for the Sharks, but there definitely could have been better. But from an offensive perspective, I do think he brought like a decent performance, so there was that. And then for Mario Ferraro, he does manage to score. Definitely credit to him. There were some bad shifts here tonight, obviously, especially in the third period when the Sharks were frequently hemmed into their own zone. Ferraro was certainly not doing a lot to help in those types of situations, but especially in the earlier parts of this game, I thought Ferraro was actually playing pretty well, and he's clearly not nearly as bad as he was in the early parts of this season, so I would still say it was a decent enough game for Ferraro. And then when it comes to the Sharks' third defensive pairing, we have Thrun and Ruda. Ruda has been playing a lot better as of late. His last, what has it been, maybe like 5 or 6 games, he's been mostly positive for the Sharks in this third pairing role. But unfortunately, that streak does come to an end here tonight. I was not as impressed with Jan Ruda's performance. Again, like I said with Mario Ferraro, not nearly as bad as it had previously been this season, but also not nearly as good as it has been over these last couple of weeks. So hopefully just a small speed bump, a small bump in the road here for Jan Ruda, and then he can get back on track for next game. And then when it comes to his defensive partner, Henry Thrun, some very classic Henry Thrun inconsistencies here tonight. I would say through about 80% or so of this game, Thrun was actually rather solid for the Sharks. The problem is that over those 20% times for Thrun, it was just not good at all. Moments in which he's just making, not even necessarily making bad plays, but just losing the puck in really awkward spots where you'd think he has possession and then he just makes a really weak pass or it just rolls off of his stick. He needs to be able to be more defensively responsible in these types of situations. There are way too many times thus far throughout this entire season in which Thrun seems to have an easy play out of the zone and then he just kind of fumbles the puck a little bit, which then causes some pressure to come in, and then he has to pass back to his defense, and then it ends up leading to some extended zone time for the other team, and it is because of Thrun's hesitation and Thrun's mistakes there. So I feel as though he had some good moments here tonight, a decent amount of them, but the bad moments in a way overshadow them. And then when it comes to the Sharks goaltender, we do have Mackenzie Blackwood. He was looking for some redemption after his previous game against the Ottawa Senators. While I don't think he was terrible in that game, he obviously didn't do the Sharks a lot of favors. One of the goals he did let in was quite bad, and letting in 4 goals on 11 shots just on paper is never going to look particularly good. And so I imagine he took that one to heart and wanted to come out and give the Sharks a chance to win tonight, and that is exactly what he managed to do. He was perhaps the Sharks' best player in general. He really helped keep them alive in the early parts of this game. The Sharks had a 4-0 lead about halfway through this one, but without Blackwood's backstopping in those first 30 minutes, the Sharks probably would have only had like a 4-2-ish lead, which would still be, a lead, but still Blackwood coming up pretty big. And then the couple of goals that he did let in the end, that McCann shot was incredible. That was a very, very difficult save to be able to make. And then the Jaden Schwartz one, maybe he could have had, but realistically probably not. And I would say, even if you wanted to sort of say, well, maybe he could have, it's a situation where Blackwood made so many big saves for the Sharks here tonight that he was a major reason for them being able to claim this victory. And so he puts himself right back in the positive column here for the Sharks, as we again take a look at the rest of the NHL and see who's in need of a goaltender. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday, so they'll finally have a little bit of a breather with a couple of days off, but they will also be traveling across the country to face off against the Washington Capitals. And the Capitals were not very good last season. They managed to squeak into the playoffs, but then got swept in the first round by the Rangers. It was not a very close series, but they have been significantly better this year. They're actually one of the best teams in the NHL, and currently they've been playing without Alex Ovechkin, and yet it seems as though they haven't really missed a beat. And so the Sharks, they will have their hands full with that team. We'll see if they manage to continue the recent success they've had, because they're going to be heading into an East Coast gauntlet over the next week. Class dismissed.